What does it take to be a leader? The answer might surprise you. Let's talk about it with Pat Williams on Steve Brown, etc.
He's an old white guy, an author, broadcaster, and seminary professor who's sick of religion. And he's brought friends. Please welcome Steve Brown, etc.
And we are so glad you're here. You've heard me say it 1,000 times, and I mean it every time I say it. You always have a place at our table. Incidentally, I'm Steve, the aforementioned old white guy, and Matthew Porter, who's our executive producer, is here. Matthew is back from a week at the beach with his family. Really good trip, Matthew?
It was. Nobody got sunburned. Nobody got bitten by a shark. So you got to say that's a win.
I'll tell you something. I'm not a big beach person. It takes me a long time to recover time on the beach. The sand and the grit and the salt water. You know, I like fresh water. It kind of washes out one's soul. My soul needs to be washed out. Our video director and one-man IT department, an amazing man, John Myers, is in his tech booth. John changed his password to incorrect. So if he types it wrong, his computer reminds me your password is incorrect. Good move, John. And our producer, Jinx, I think we offended last week, and he has gone. And George Bingham is not here either. Was it something I said?
Yes, it was.
Yeah.
Actually, I don't know where Jinx is, but
Jinx got stuck. He sent me a text message and said he got stuck. You know, typically when you introduce him, you say Jinx is in his little glass booth.
Yeah.
And today he said he was stuck in another little glass booth that actually was masquerading as somebody's attic and couldn't get out. Couldn't get out.
He's locked in. Yep. And Matthew is joining George is joining his daughter in Atlanta. So he is en route. And you will have to determine whether the program is better or worse with them gone. Most people think that when Matthew does this program and I'm gone, I should stay gone a whole lot more.
That is fake news.
By the way,
that is fake
the
news.
Soft feminine side of the program. Kathy's from Connecticut, also known as the Nutmeg State. Kathy, does that make you a Spice Girl?
No, it does not. But I tell you this, I will tell you this. I've had a great time, just a short amount that I've read, because so much of what transpired during the Revolutionary War was up there in New England and in my home state of Connecticut. A lot of it, I was reading a chapter today on the female Paul Revere, which Pat wrote about, and talking about cities in Connecticut and all that kind of stuff. It was great. I was reliving my childhood.
All right. We'll find out about the female Paul Revere. Pat Williams, if you haven't guessed, my friend, my beloved friend, is our guest. He's written so many books. Every time he burps, they type it out in text and they publish it. He's retired as senior vice president of the NBA's Orlando Magic in May of 2019 to head up an effort, believe it or not, to bring Major League Baseball to Orlando. He has more than 50 years of professional sports experience, written more than 100 books, among them Coach Wooden's Greatest Secret, The Character Carved in Stone. And the latest book that we're going to be talking about today, and it's connected with July the 4th, is Revolutionary Leadership, Essential Lessons from the Men and Women of the American Revolution. Pat, thank you so much for taking your time from a very busy schedule and being with us. When you die, they're going to dissect your brain just to find out what's going on there. I'd be interested in why this book and why now? Did you plan it to come out around the 4th, or was the seed there and you just had to write it and get it out? Tell us where it came from.
Well, Steve, the publisher, Revere, made that decision to bring it out colliding right with the 4th of July. But we've got to go back a little bit further, Steve. I grew up in Wilmington, Delaware. My dad was a high school history teacher and baseball coach. My mother was an American patriot of the highest order. And so growing up in Wilmington, very near Philadelphia, very near Valley Forge, I was exposed to all of those early events of American history when I was just a kid. And so there was an American history seed planted in me way back. And then as I moved along in life, I became absolutely fascinated with leadership and began to study the great leaders of history and my own experiences in leadership, trying to figure out what it takes to be a leader of excellence. And so then the thought was, could we go study the great leaders of the American Revolutionary War period and see what we can learn from them? And then outline very clearly what they did well as leaders and what we can emulate. So that was the background of the book. We ended up with 25 of these men and women, some very famous, some not so much, but they all made very bold and courageous contributions to this nation of ours, which had no business getting started. Great Britain was the power on earth, and our little colonists were just running around with, no military training, nothing. And yet over the 8-year period, this country was birthed. All I can say is God had his hand all over it, and it was a miracle.
So there really was. It was a miraculous beginning. And for a lot of reasons, you can read those stories. Pat, there's some parallels between now and then. I think if we were in just one sentence to describe the problem in America, it's a problem with leadership. And I suspect your book would be a good book to be read by our leaders, both right and left, because we have a wonderful heritage.
Steve,
by the way, for those of you who do not live in Orlando, at least in where I'm doing this, I'm going through a major thunderstorm, and I'm surrounded by electronic equipment. And we've lost the power twice since I've been talking to you. And next time, the lightning bolt may hit me. And when it does, Matthew will say, there's somebody bigger than Steve. So I just wanted to tell you, that's the noise you hear in the background, because that drives John Myers nuts. Now,
Steve, I am very familiar with thunderstorms in Central Florida. And I flew out today to a convention here in Dallas. So I'm missing this storm today, but I can say this. When I get back tomorrow and the rest of the summer, there will be plenty more thunderstorms that come booming across. But Steve, without them, the whole state of Florida would dry up and become nothing but barren open space like Arizona. So those thunderstorms can be a little intimidating, but we always need that rain. Nevertheless, carry on, my friend.
Let's go back to what we were talking about before God so rudely interrupted me. We were talking about the problem today is leadership, just as the problem at the beginning was leadership. And maybe we fix it in the same way. What do you think?
Steve, it's amazing to me, in the moments of crisis in our country, God has always raised up some remarkable leaders, starting with the Revolutionary War period. A remarkable team of leaders. Then go to the Civil War period when our country was in severe jeopardy. And God raised up Abraham Lincoln and other brave, courageous leaders that allowed our country to exist. And then let's go to the World War II period, when the entire world was up for grabs and our nation was teetering. And yet, God raised up men and women of exceptional leadership skills and got us through that period. I'm confident that God will do the same. But in the meantime, we need to be training and getting young leaders ready to lead. We need to be instructing them and showing them what it takes. And that's one of the reasons behind this book, because at the end of each chapter, we list the leadership principles we can learn from John Adams and from Benjamin Franklin and from Washington and from Henry Knox and General Nathaniel Greene, fascinating people. And as it turns out, they were all excellent leaders, and there's so much we can learn from them.
So you're not pessimistic. I mean, maybe mildly so, but you really believe that God still has his hand on this country.
Steve, here's the thing that's amazing to me. Up until, I don't know, the last, 10, 20 years, nobody wrote books about leadership. Nobody taught courses on it. Nobody did podcasts about leadership. You couldn't get a PhD in leadership 20 years ago. But today, leadership training is all over the place, and I've got to think it's going to pay off in the long run.
All right. We'll talk about it on the other side of the break. Don't go anywhere, and we won't either. Hey, we're so glad you're with us, and we're so glad that Pat is with us, too. We're talking to Pat Williams, author, speaker, retired senior VP of the Orlando Magic, and right now is involved in a project in the town where this program originates in bringing Major League Baseball to Orlando. How you doing with that, Pat?
Steve, we're encouraged. Orlando is such a dynamic market. We have now become the 17th largest media market in North America.
Wow.
Just past Miami. Denver and Detroit are next on the line, and we're going to catch them in the next few years. Orlando grows in all four directions. And Steve, that doesn't take into account the number of visitors that come from all over the world. The year before the pandemic, there were 78 million visitors. Almost 80 million people came to visit Orlando to go to Disney and go to Universal and go to SeaWorld and play golf and go to the Space Coast and go to Legoland. And I'm convinced with a beautiful Major League ballpark that, they're going to want to set aside a day or an evening to go see Major League Baseball. So we're the Orlando Dreamers. I've got my Dreamers hat on. And we're plugging away at it, most of it under the surface. But we're convinced that Orlando is now the biggest media market that doesn't have a big league ball club. And I think our time has come.
Great. Wouldn't that be good?
That'd be fun. So, Pat, yesterday I started by just going through the table of contents because I was curious to take a look at the people that you were going to talk about in the book. And of course, being female, I was really pleased to see the names of a number of them. And of course, I have to say that nearly every case, wasn't remotely familiar with any of them, which doesn't bode well for my U.S. history class back in high school. But anyway, I would like for you, because I'm hoping that other women, when they listen to this interview, that they'll say, oh, you know what? I don't know very much about women as far as the Revolutionary War period either. So I really want to get this book. I would like for you to tell us about the woman that you labeled as the female Paul Revere. And the reason I wanted to tell you this little snippet about this is I was reading through that chapter about her. It talked about some of the places where she went and secured people to come and help. And one of the gentlemen was a brigadier general whose last name was Silliman. And the thing that was so interesting to me, and of course they were talking about cities in Connecticut, and I'm from Connecticut, and Silliman just rang a bell in my head. So I looked that up because I was familiar with the name Mary Silliman, who, as it turns out, was the wife of this brigadier general. And my mother and my grandmother belonged to the Mary Silliman chapter of the Daughters of the American Revolution, the DAR. So I knew this name. It was like rattling around in my old head. And so I read all about that, prompted me to read all about her and, and find out all this background and how much, she was even involved in it. So it was just fascinating to me. So tell us about the female Paul Revere, okay?
Well, Sarah Bradley Fulton, she was a very brave and courageous woman. And we highlight the fact that she was the major factor behind the Boston Tea Party. Okay. Let's just review for a minute. Tea was a big deal in those days. Iced tea today is still a big deal to me, but back in the day, tea was big. And but the problem was there was this issue of taxation. The British were taxing us on everything because they had financial problems left over from the French and Indian War. And so the taxation on this tea was part of it. So Sarah Bradley Fulton had an idea. Let's really get under Great Britain's skin. And why don't we dress up some of our men like Native Americans and sneak onto the boat and then just lift and dump all these cases of tea into the Boston harbor in the still of the night. And they did. And I'm sure Sarah Bradley Fulton watching this was very pleased. It was a statement of real rebellion. So in those days, word took a long time to get across the sea. But it did. And King George III was irate, angry as could be. And he said, we'll put those colonists in their place. And across the ocean, here come the boats, and here comes the army. And here comes the world's biggest navy. And we're going to put these colonists in their place very quickly. So we don't have to put up with this anymore. These people are too big for their britches or their skirts. and yet I agree with you, Kathy. I didn't know who Sarah Bradley Fulton was until we got into this book, and then realized that she was a big deal. And hopefully, with this book, we're going to take Miss Sarah out of the shadows of history and give her a prominent place that she deserves. But it's fascinating to dig into that whole Boston Tea Party, which was such a huge part of triggering this war that went on for 8 solid years.
Wow.
8 years.
I took our granddaughters. And
that's where George Washington comes in, and we can do a nice little piece on George, because without him,
where would we be?
Without him, I think it's safe to say we probably don't have a country today. So when they say George was the father of our country, it's true. First as the military leader for 8 years, and then our first president for 8 years. And Washington did not want to be involved in this. He was a farmer at heart, and he wanted to be back on his farm there on the Potomac. But he was called on by his fellow revolters, and he stepped up. We can never study Washington in enough depth. He was not perfect. He was a flaw. These people were flawed. But boy, they came together at the right time, and they put their leadership on the line. And it's interesting because they all had different skills. Washington was not a great orator, but Thomas Jefferson, who hated public speaking, was a brilliant writer. Patrick Henry, magnificent communicator publicly. I know not what course others may take, but as for me, give me liberty or give me death. He was a verbal communicator. So they all had different skills, and somehow or other God took it and wove it together to be so effective. And thus we have the United States of America.
Pat, we're going to look at some other people when we get back. This is good stuff, and you ought to get a copy of the book. It's called Revolutionary Leadership, Essential Lessons from the Men and Women of the American Revolution. This would be a good time to get it and to read it to your kids and to teach it and see them be inspired with our heritage of leadership in America. Guys, we're going to rest up, but we're coming back. Hey, thanks for being with us. You always have a place at our table. We're hanging out with Pat Williams, my beloved friend. He's author, speaker, retired senior VP of the Orlando Magic, and is right now involved in a project to bring Major League Baseball to Orlando. You can keep up with him at patwilliams.com. And if you can't spell that, you need to go back to school on Twitter at Orlando Magic Pat. Okay.
Pat, before the break, something Steve mentioned about the book being good for kids. And as I was reading through the book, that's exactly what I was thinking about. We have 4 kids, and we're constantly talking to them about their choices through the lens of what does a leader do. And as I was reading through the book, you're talking about leadership at the same time as talking about important moments in American history. I'm like, this is the first book that I could think of. And we talked to a lot of great authors and about a lot of great books, but this is the first one I could think of in terms of, I can't wait to put this into the hands of my 7th grader and my 6th grader and the younger ones eventually. Specific to them, what's interesting is we think of like Washington and we think of these iconic people, but you mentioned this in there that Major George Washington was writing his kind of notes and memoirs at like 19. Some of these pivotal figures were so very young. So I would wonder if you could kind of speak to that and to delve in a little bit deeper into Washington and some of the lesser known things that he has done.
Matthew, first of all, we wrote this book obviously for adults, but the way we write, any 7th grader can grasp it. And I'm concerned about how American history is being taught these days, and how little about American history the average teenager knows. You know, ask them what came first, the Revolutionary War or the Civil War? You're not going to get 100% answers. Or what came first, World War I or World War II? You know, you may not get the answer you think you want.
Wow.
So I think we've got a big job to do just teaching the fundamentals of American history.
Yeah.
And Matthew, you hit a good point. Yes, they were young. Now, Washington was in his early 40s. But let's talk for a minute about Lafayette. Lafayette was a Frenchman. He heard about this war that was going on. He wanted to be part of it. So he took a ship over here to the New World, to this country, by himself, 19 years old. Got off on a port somewhere in South Carolina, didn't know a soul, wended his way up north and encountered he encountered Washington. And Washington, who had people coming at him from all angles, for some reason was taken with this young man. And he brought him into his world. And many say he was almost like a surrogate son to him. Washington did not have children of his own. And young Lafayette just became like a very important part of General Washington's life. And he gave him opportunities. Lafayette fought in many of these major battles. The Battle of the Brandywine, Germantown. He was wounded in Brandywine. And then, of course, he led a division in Yorktown, the final battle. This young guy was just a vital part of the war effort. But I'm particularly intrigued that he made such a mark here in this country. He went back to France and ran into all sorts of problems, almost lost his life, but then came back to the United States for a tour well after the war. Washington was gone. But he made this tour and he was received just as a huge hero. So today we have Lafayette, Louisiana, and we've got Lafayette, Indiana, and we've got Lafayette College in Easton, Pennsylvania, and that's just a few of them. So this young man Lafayette really made a mark, and he became this enormous hero here in America. I think it's a fascinating story. And one that, let's put it this way. Without Lafayette, we may not have won the war. Each one of these people was so vital. And Lafayette certainly played a vital role in the whole thing.
Wow.
Great story.
Man, great story.
And I think that was an interesting mark about Washington. He was a good delegator. He did not have to do it all by himself. A great example in Valley Forge, these men are there in the cold winter. It was not a pleasant place. And another European arrives by the name of Baron von Steuben, a Prussian, didn't speak English except cussing. He could cuss in many languages. And Washington let this guy who he did not know, he let him loose to train these men how to be soldiers. They were just farmers who had gathered together and, just out there in a frenzy. But von Steuben taught him how to march and how to move as a unit and how to be a military force. And because Washington knew he needed good people around him to help him with this effort.
All right. We're going to hear some stories about some other people on the other side of the break. The name of the book is called Revolutionary Leadership, Essential Lessons from the Men and Women of the American Revolution. And you need to get this into the curriculum of your school. Hey, we're talking to Pat Williams, and what a fun time we've had. Be sure and check out patwilliams.com on Twitter at Orlando Magic Pat. And if you like what you hear on this broadcast, or if you're watching it on video, then make sure you join our email list. Once a week, we'll send you an article or video and occasionally some free stuff. And while you're thinking about it, go to keylife.org/surprise.
Pat, in the book, you detail all of these historical figures and what we can learn from them. But I think taking one step back, I think there's a lot of misconceptions people have about leadership and what it means and what it takes. There's folks who would say, oh, well, leadership, that's when somebody's in charge of these other people in an org chart. Or, leaders are people just have a certain personality and that's how they're born and they just become leaders because that's how they were just genetically gifted. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about some myths, speak some truth to those myths, and talk about what really it actually takes to be a great transformative leader.
Matthew, I don't think there's any set form for leaders. I can remember this story years ago. My son Bobby got a managing job in the Washington Nationals farm system. And so in order to help him, I started talking to coaches and managers, and I just asked him, tell me the 5 things that you would pass on to my son in this new role as a young baseball manager. And one guy said, if he's got a personality like Billy Martin, let him be Billy Martin. If he's got a personality like Walter Alston, then let him be Walter Alston. But above all, don't try and be Billy Martin if you're Walter Alston, because your players will spot immediately that you're a phony, that you're not really true to yourself. So I think that applies to leadership. Let's take a quick look. Jefferson was basically an introvert. He was very laid back. John Adams, fiery, feisty, outspoken. Fortunately, it's very interesting. He and Abigail, his wife, wrote extensively to each other through this whole period. They just wrote volumes. And fortunately, they both saved their letters. And historians are so grateful. Wow. On the other hand, Martha Washington just burned all the letters. 2 escaped.
Wow.
But all of that correspondence was destroyed. And historians to this day are just sorrowful that happened. But my point is, each one of these people had different personalities and they had different approaches to things. Yeah. And they each led in a different way. I mentioned earlier, Patrick Henry. The word is strident. He was outspoken. Henry Knox, 21 years old, he was a bookseller and a very well proportioned bookseller. Let's just say he was obese.
Or fat.
Nathaniel Green, he was a Quaker from Rhode Island. Kathy, another New Englander.
Yeah.
And he, the Quakers don't fight, but he did. And without Nathaniel Green and his successes in the southern part of the war, we don't prevail. We were in trouble without Nathaniel Green. So they all had different backgrounds, different religions in many ways. They had different training, different interests. It's fascinating to see eventually how it all came together like a big mosaic that God was working. And he knew exactly where everybody needed to be at the right time with the right skills and the right leadership training. And somehow it worked. It's a fascinating story.
It really is, because you've got, every bit of the spectrum, young to seasoned, male, female, white, non-white, and even your great leaders, you have these seasons of their life where they were still green and still making mistakes. They didn't just pop out of the chute, these hardened leaders. It's really encouraging, the miracle of how this leadership group came together.
And Matthew, I don't want to miss Alexander Hamilton, who's made big news on Broadway. But this young man grew up on an island, Nevis, in the Caribbean, and didn't have much of a life. But he had a great mind, and some men down there saw a future for him, and it wasn't going to be in Nevis. So they put him on a boat and shipped him up to New York. he was a teenager. And he ended up going to what is now Columbia University to go to college. And somehow or other, he got impatient with that education. The war was up and running, and he wanted to be part of it. So he came to Washington's attention. He was no more than 20 years old. And so Henry Knox, 21. I mean, they were so young. I mean, they signed their autographs with crayons. That's how young they were. and yet they grew up in a hurry.
Mm.
Yeah.
And Washington was so good at letting these guys spread their wings, but he also was able to clip them when necessary. I think it's so important to study Washington in depth. I mean, in depth to see how he led and how he did it and how effective he was in his own way. He was one of a kind. We've never seen his likes before. And so when they rank the presidents, Washington and Lincoln are generally tied for that first spot, and deservedly so.
He was a unifying figure. We need that today, don't we?
Oh, listen, where is that Washington? Where's another Reagan? Is it Governor DeSantis, who's getting a lot of national play, Steve? Our governor in Florida.
Oh, I love him. I think he's.
I am hoping that maybe he is the next Reagan.
Yeah.
Wouldn't that be great?
But we need. But boy, he's getting a lot of. And I noticed they had this poll of the top 10 candidates, and he was one, and Trump was two. That was kind of interesting.
Pat, we're out of time.
Well,
and I hate it. This time has gone by so
fast. Wow.
Thank you. I love this program, and I love the stories you tell, and I love the things you do. You make such a difference in so many lives in so many ways, and we rise up and call you blessed. Can we do this again sometime?
Steve, anytime, and when we get back, we'll set up another lunch date.
I'll look forward to that.
And that's always a hoot. So,
guys,
I spend most of my life
come back and tell you who we're going to have next week. You're going to be surprised and pleased, so don't go anywhere. By the way, if you were listening when I said you could get on our email list, I sent you to the wrong place. It might be interesting. It could be a porn site, but I'll be careful.
Oh, good grief.
So it's keylife.org/ not surprise, but subscribe. And you'll be glad that I corrected that, because who knows what you would find if you went to where I told you to.
Have you been there?
It might be 2-point Calvinism. You don't want to go there. That's
no, you don't want to go.
Ooh, no.
Or 6-point Calvinism. 6-point is unlimited luck. And talking about luck and providence, what a great program with Pat Williams. I have known Pat for piles and piles of years, and I remember when he was talking, we met in Hong Kong, believe it or not. And I remember when he was trying to get the Orlando Magic or the Magic to come to Orlando. And we talked about it a long time. And I remember thinking, it ain't going to happen. I mean, he's not going to be able to pull it off. You should never say something like that to Pat Williams, because
Never.
I mean, he does things that most people just can't do. And he eventually got the Orlando Magic here. was the leading figure with the Magic for years and is still involved with them. And when he gets the baseball club here, and he'll be involved in that too. So it was good to have him with us. But what he said was so important. I'm not as positive as Pat is about our country and about God bringing up or raising up the right leaders, but he makes me feel hopeful. And I need some hope because it's kind of scary right now. There's so much leverage and so much power and so much money and so much self-righteousness and so much pride. And frankly, I'm worse about all those things than anybody I know, but nobody has asked me to lead anybody anywhere. So I can do very little damage. But some people who have those things as a part of their makeup are now leading the country. And I'm not talking politically. I mean, this is right and left and conservative and liberal and progressive. As you know, I'm a conservative and I would prefer to have DeSantis in office.
Would you like to run for something?
What? No. Yeah.
We could do a grassroots effort.
And I want to be referred to as Your Eminence, too.
Oh, okay.
By the way, you have no idea who's going to be on next.
Well, see, you decided for some reason that you thought you deserved a vacation. So I have to drop back and punt and figure out what to do. So tune in and find out.
Hey, we will be here next week, or somebody.
Yes, we will.
And it's our hope that you'll join us. Between now and then, don't do anything we wouldn't. It's your wide, wide berth.